Tonight on After the News, Britain's most wanted woman, kill or capture. My guests and I will also be talking about the messiest divorce ever and the problem of young parents trapped in poverty. Their fault or our responsibility? Today's big talking points, tomorrow's biggest stories, all on After the News. Welcome to the programme, and welcome to Labour MP Caroline Flint and journalist and broadcaster Julia Hartley Brewer. We'll have all the big stories you'll be reading about tomorrow morning in print and online throughout the programme. First, Sally Ann Jones, Britain's most wanted woman, fleeing from Raqqa, someone who recruits girls to the Islamic State. So kill or try to capture? Well, today Jeremy Corbyn was asked what he'd have done.
Would you have given the order to kill Sally Jones in a drone strike to prevent British armed forces being put unnecessarily in harm's way?
I think it's difficult to give an answer to that question, which is hypothetical. I think we have to look at very carefully at the effects on the civilian population of any bombing that takes place before such a decision is made, but you have to look at all the facts of it.
Caroline, how satisfied or how clear was that answer?
Well, I think he's right about looking at all the facts, and in an ideal situation it'd be great if we could bring people like that back to trial, but she made a choice when she went to Syria and Iraq and she crossed the line. And let's remember, she was encouraging women from this country to go out there and join Daesh. She was, I think, online showing people how to make a bomb, as well as encouraging people to kill here in this country. So I'm afraid, you know, she crossed the line, and I think she was a legitimate
Straightforward
target.
decision?
I think in this case it was. She made the decision. This is the clear. She made the decision, and she's brought untold misery and death to a lot of people.
Julia, shouldn't it have been better to go and get her and bring her to trial?
Well, what a lovely idea in an ideal world. And yes, if ISIS were fighting in Narnia, maybe that was possible. No, but this is a war zone. She's an enemy combatant. Goodbye, good riddance. The world's a better place. Hope she finds her dead jihadist husband and finds him with his very many virgins. So what I find extraordinary about that, really, actually, is Jeremy Corbyn. Our politicians this week not doing too well when it comes to those hypothetical questions. Of course, you want to know the facts, as he said, and as you agree. But the point is that he wouldn't send in a drone. There's no risk to our troops. This is an enemy combatant. She needs to be taken out.
But hold on, let's just stop for a second, because it's possible that her 12-year-old son, it's as yet unconfirmed, but it's possible her 12-year-old son was with her, travelling with her.
It's a great shame.
That's all it is?
It's a great shame. Yeah,
So,
war. There are casualties of war. It's a great shame. She took him to a war zone. She risked his life, not the British or the Americans.
So an innocent 12-year-old boy is just blown up by the drone?
Well, she's quite
You're
happy for innocent 12-year-old boys to get blown up on the tube here in London, isn't she?
Yeah.
But
Caroline?
of course, she has no respect for human life, whether they're children or adults. But I think, you know, look, we don't know the circumstances of her death, and we don't know who was travelling with her. I think a lot of attention goes into using drones and when to strike. And actually, from what I've had in terms of briefings from the MOD, is what they do look at is trying to make sure that as far as possible they can limit any civilian casualties. But let's not forget, she took her son into that situation as well. But, you know, this is a terrible situation she's placed herself in and her family.
In a sentence, Julia Hartley Brewer, Jeremy Corbyn, again, weak on defence. He was, if you remember the election, he had nuclear bombs, but he never used them.
Weak doesn't do justice to it. Of course not.
Julia.
He's unfit for public
Julia,
office.
Not weak.
Well, look, Jeremy made the point that you have to look at all the facts. And if he could look at all those facts, I'm sure he would support, where necessary, drone action.
Well,
hang on a minute, Julia. Jeremy made it very clear after the Manchester Arena bombing that in a situation where our police on the streets faced someone who was going to threaten other people, that
Caroline,
they should
in
have
June this year, he was asked if there was an imminent threat from nuclear weapons. He was asked a number of times would he authorise use, and he couldn't say yes.
You'd have to know all the facts.
That's the reality, Caroline.
No, I understand on that question, but you were asking about if there was a situation where there was terrorism, for example. And what he did make clear earlier this year was in a situation where our police were defending other people being killed on our streets, then they had the right and the duty to shoot to protect others.
In a sentence, Julia, I know you want to get in touch with your
I just think
sentence.
the fact that he even needs to say that's a given.
OK, all right, OK. Let's move on. The front pages of the papers are in, and they focus on two main stories. For The Sun, it's Weinstein offered me sex contract. This is Miley in class, adding to the list of allegations swirling around Harvey Weinstein. And for The Telegraph, it's Tory rebels stall Brexit bill. And for the Times, well, the Times has a truly shocking front page story about child trafficking. But also, Philip Hammond must be sacked, say senior Tories. Well, of course, that speaks to every breakup is difficult, but once both sides have hammered out the details, the best thing surely is just to move on. Yet, count them, 475 days after that vote, we've no real idea what this divorce is going to look like. All made even harder because one side seems to be at war with itself. Julia, come to you first. Philip Hammond appearing in the headlines again. If he's not on the ticket, if he's not singing from the hymn sheet, time to go.
Absolutely time to go. I'd have got rid of Boris Johnson as well. You know, it's cabinet collective responsibility or it's nothing at all. Theresa May's got no authority, but she's got less authority by not using the small authority she has, which is to decide who is in her cabinet. I don't even think Philip Hammond needs just to be sacked. I think he should be tried for treason. That man is single-handedly undermining the British national interest on a daily basis. He has no business being at the Treasury.
How is he doing that? You've got to break that down a little bit.
Well, it's very, very simple. He's basically undermining any plans for no deal. The best way for going into a negotiation, I don't know if Philip Hammond's ever negotiated buying a car or a new salary in a new job, but my God, I hope he never does it on my behalf. You actually have to be able to, well, be willing to walk away, and that involves having other options and being able to prepare. He's made it really clear in that article for the Times and in his statement to the Treasury Select Committee, he's not prepared to put any money behind any cost. I mean, it could be in the billions, admittedly, or well into the billions, to prepare for no deal. But that's precisely what we do have to do to ensure we do get a deal.
Well, Caroline, it's very easy to take pot shots at the government, and you could say, my goodness, they deserve it. But just run through us. What is Labour's position?
Yeah, I do. I mean,
I'm very happy to put out Labour's position. Basically, Labour's position is we accept the result of the referendum. We do think that actually, and I have to say I agree with this, the talk about a no deal is not helpful. There will be a deal. There's a lot of noises off on both sides, both in terms of from, you know, ardent Remainers and ardent Brexiters as well as from the EU and our own negotiating team. The truth is there will have to be a deal. So ramping up the idea of a no deal I don't think is helpful.
So we pay a divorce bill, Caroline?
Well, Theresa May and David Davis have already said that.
Yeah, but I'm asking about Labour. Labour's happy to pay it.
Well, no, we have to find a way to make sure...
So we do pay a divorce bill?
Well, we do have to find a way to make sure that we pay something for things that we already signed up to. Down the road, there may be areas where we will still be cooperating with the EU, so we'll have to think about that.
So we make a payment to stay for trade access?
Well, that depends on what that involves. Some of the organisations that oversee trade, we might still want to be part of. But if I give you an example of something like Euratom, which deals with nuclear safety, for everything I've heard from government ministers, they still want to be involved in an organisation like that. So there's a payment to be paid there. But David Davis and Theresa May have made it very clear that there will have to be a payment made, and that seems entirely sensible as we leave the European Union.
All right, Julia, let's talk a little bit about the cabinet tensions. Take a look at this from a cabinet meeting. There they are, looking as happy. There's nothing worse than being stuck at a weird dinner party sat next to someone you can't stand, which I think is probably going on there. What do you take from the looks they're giving each other, from the position they're all in, the positions they're taking in this jockeying?
They wish they were in Theresa May's job. That's what they're all saying.
Each and every one of them.
Each and every one of them, probably.
I don't think they do. I don't think anyone wants to be in her job at the moment. No, I think what's interesting, actually, if you go back to the coalition years with Cameron and Nick Clegg, there was actually more agreement within that cabinet than there is in the cabinet we've got now. I mean, you've got the battle between the Leavers and the Remainers, battle between the Remainers, battle between the Leavers, and everyone's saying, well, there's no loyalty. The trouble is that no one really thinks that Theresa May is doing a good job, except perhaps, I don't know, Damien Green, and her deputy in all but name. I mean, I don't speak to any Tories who think that she's doing a good job. It's just they don't know what the options would be if she wasn't there. And the reality is she may be the best of a bad lot. But I don't think any of those people, if they were sane, would want to be in that job right now.
How difficult is it if you're not getting on particularly well with the party leader, Caroline?
Well, it can be very difficult. and with someone like Boris, part of his problem, I think, is that he's been pretty marginalised. Although he is the Foreign Secretary, he's marginal to the Brexit negotiations when he would probably really like David Davis.
But it must be frustrating. I'll just remind the viewers, of course, you resigned because you were effectively, is it fair to say, sidelined? Is that the word we'd use?
I think I resigned because the way in which Gordon was running things, I didn't agree with it, and I chose to resign. I mean, the truth about this is if some of those people around that table do not agree with Theresa May, let them stand down from those very highly paid cabinet positions and stand on their own 2 feet. That's the difference between my decision to stand down and them still wanting to take the pay.
Julia, as I mentioned earlier, something like 16 months since the Brexit vote, we've not moved forward. If the government get this wrong, the people will never forgive them, will they?
No, I do
There's a
think...
chance they'll go off into the wilderness.
Well, I think they'll punish the Tories, but I think more importantly, they will be very, very angry with the EU. It's a very interesting poll today, Sky Data poll, which suggested that 74% of Britons, that will mean an awful lot of Remainers as well as Leavers, believe that no deal is better than a bad deal. They'll be punishing the EU rather than perhaps the British government.
Julia, back to you in a moment. Let's stay with that theme and pick up on another morning newspaper. Dan Sabat is over at The Guardian, editing the paper tonight. The story's on your front page tomorrow. What are you saying? What's the headline, Dan?
Have a look at our gorgeous Guardian. I hope you can see that right there. But we're just talking about chaos. That's the situation when it comes to Brexit right now. You know, the government doesn't know what's going on. The government's not even in control of events. We've got a situation currently where we've got sterling plunging because Michel Barnier is warning of the situation and negotiations. We don't know. You know, we don't know if the Brexit talks are moving forward. They look mighty like they've stalled right now. We don't know if the British government's going to be able to progress on trade at all. Meanwhile, the government can't even get the EU withdrawal bill through. You know, we've got, you know, it too is stalled. It was going to bring the EU withdrawal bill back to the committee stage next week in the House of Commons. Now they've had to delay it. Why? There's 300 amendments. There may be a dozen Labour reckons on which they might be able to beat the government. Again, more chaos, more confusion.
Dan Sabat, thank you, joining us from The Guardian. Just a quick line. Julia, you are, or were, a Brexiter. We've heard of, still are.
Brexit till I die.
Brexit. Even with the litany we've just heard from Dan at The Guardian.
We don't know that. Look, the thing about The Guardian and the remoteness,
Well,
like
hang on,
the
the
Guardian,
pound has taken a pound. Some of that was
there was no information that came out today that wasn't known in beforehand. There was no expectation there was going to be a big move on the trade negotiations.
The viewers now are getting 112. They used to get 141.
No, but exactly. But,
for the euro.
Because it's a load of bunch of spivs in smart suits in the city go gambling on the pound. Yeah, do you know what? We've also got a massive boom in tourism because people can afford to come to this country and spend money. So swings and roundabouts on that.
Right.
No, the reality is there are bonus like The Guardian. They constantly take everything that Europhiles say as true, and it's not.
But the government are inspiring confidence.
I'll give you that. An opportunity to come back to that. Right, to other matters. Whose responsibility is it to help young parents get by, get a job and get on? According to a report released exclusively to us by the charity Action for Children Tonight, nearly half of young parents are simply unable to cope financially, earning way under the average national wage. Clearly something has to be done. Caroline, let's start with you. What needs to be done?
Well, I think one thing is to recognise that sometimes, you know, when people have young children very young, that often means they've not finished necessarily their education, and then they have the children, the childcare and everything on top of that, and they just can't find a way to progress. Now, I think, you know, part of it is that what support can we give to make sure that if they've missed out on education, they get a second chance. That often involves maybe providing childcare. But importantly, you know, what the problem about these young people, and this is what the report addresses, a lot of the support stops at 21. And there's those groups of young parents under 25 who suddenly they've got access to nothing. So I think there has to be something to recognise that actually we need something to go beyond 21, 23, 24 for these young parents.
Have a cost to that, Caroline?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, there is already services out there. I don't think there's necessarily a huge cost. This is about engaging.
They're talking about having coaches, people coaching parents.
Well, listen, do you know what?
Were you coached?
Well, I was coached in some ways in that I learnt from examples elsewhere, but part
but you
of
didn't
it
have
is...
a parent
but
coach.
the thing is, the difference on that is I was fortunate that I was the first in my family to go to university, so I lived away from home as a student. I didn't start as a mum, and I was a young mum in my 20s. I didn't start as a young mum living away from the first time at home with kids. Sometimes people want a bit more support.
Julia,
and these young people do.
if you choose to have children, if you choose to have a lot of children, whose responsibility is it? Should you have the cash or should you look to the state?
Well, I'm a generous of you. I was an old mum. I did it at 38, but far too late. The fundamental thing is if you want to have children, you should be able to afford to look after them. And, you know, I'm afraid you don't get to live on benefits your life and pick your kids up from school when you want to and expect the state to pay. However, I do agree with an awful lot of that Caroline said. And the reality is for a lot of these people, it's not because they've had kids that they're poor. It's actually the reason why they've had kids at a young age and made not perhaps very good decisions and perhaps not been given the best advantages in life and a good parenting and good schooling is actually it's because they failed at school. They've had...
So the state then steps in again?
Yeah, well, the question is how much does it cost not to step in?
But it's not about handout. It's about hand up. And last summer, I was doing something with the YWCA in my constituency, young men and young women, some of whom were parents. For whatever reason, things hadn't gone according to plan. And they were involved in getting work placements with local employers, and many of them were able to get jobs as a result of that. I think that's a good investment because then they're out there working and they can
Well,
pay
it's a
their
damn
taxes
sight better than
and
leaving
look
them on
after their
benefits.
kids.
There's one thing I don't approve of. Whether you're a
You know?
single parent or you're a poor parent, you are not sitting on benefits because you've got a kid, because virtually every parent who's married or is out working full time, and so must single parents do.
But there will be people watching this who are screaming at the television that they've raised their children, they were never had parent coaches for them, they never had extra
maybe
benefits.
they didn't need them.
But this is not about all young people under 25s who've had kids. This is about a particular group of young people who, I'm sure in terms of, if you look at their backstories, maybe they've had problems in their life, maybe they weren't parented very well in the first place. So whatever the circumstances they're in, and of course we should encourage young people to maybe think about these things before they have kids and finish their education, they are where they are now. So what do? Do we just leave them to be
but
more
a lot of
impoverished,
these young people,
or
to
do
be
we actually
fair-
support them to get on and support their kids so the kids can do better?
It's all very
than
well
them?
saying they, finish their education. I think the stats show that 1 in 10 of these kids have gone to university. Well, young people are not kids anymore, whereas compares to 4 in 10 of their peer group. The reality is actually a lot of these youngsters were not going to go on and be high flyers anyway.
No,
they were at the bottom of their class. They were going to probably do minimum wage jobs anyway. But the reality is, it's very hard to put food on the table for your kid when you've got a minimum wage job.
Some of the comments you made there, how can you justify what you're saying? You seem to be condemning these people.
I'm not condemning them at all. I'm saying that we have to live with the consequences of our choices. It's easier for some people to make better choices.
Hang on. In some instances, those choices are accidents.
They are. People have accidents. There are also ways of dealing with accidents, and thousands of young women deal with the accident of getting pregnant unplanned every single week.
So you're urging that there should be more abortions? Is that what you're saying?
Personally, as a daughter of an NHS GP, I would say generally, I'm a big fan of Belton Basis contraception. Actually,
But it can fail.
Yeah, of course, it can fail. But yeah, and I also
Caroline,
think
this is a bit simplistic.
Well, I mean, one of the really good things we've seen in recent years is the number of actual young women, teenagers getting pregnant has gone down. And that's because there's been intervention. There has been access to contraceptives, but also looking out for some of the warning signs where young girls may think, well, they get involved in risky relationships and end up with a baby. Some of the greatest stuff I've seen is where young mums who had a kid when they were a teenager go back and talk to other young women and say, look, I love my child, but don't do it. Try and make sure you can get on and make some choices for yourself and then have a family.
Well, we have to get on now. And coming up after the break, who should decide if a brain-damaged little boy should continue to receive treatment? His parents, his doctors, or the courts? I'll see you in a moment. Welcome back. Some more stories to look at, both from tomorrow's newspapers and online. The Daily Mirror, movie mogul, preyed on me when I was a schoolgirl. That's Kate Beckinsale. HuffPost UK site, police probe Weinstein. Scotland Yard investigating. To the independent website, Donald Tusk slams brakes on Brexit and delays trade talks. And for the Daily Mail, sack saboteur hammered. That's the word Nigel Lawson, not the Daily Mail, chose to use. Although, of course, for Julia Hartley Brewer, she did say he thought he should be tried for treason. Now, we all remember the desperately sad tale of Charlie Gard. Tomorrow, the parents of 7-month-old Isaiah Thomas are embarking on a similar battle. Now, Isaiah was left severely brain damaged at birth. His parents will be going to the High Court to fight a decision by doctors that he should be allowed to die. Julia Hartley Brewer, a decision such as this, desperately difficult. Who takes it? The doctors, the parents?
Well, there, but for the grace, we're all parents. I mean, this is just your worst case scenario, isn't it? The reality is, when the parents do disagree with the medics, I'm afraid the courts do need to make that decision, because they alone are acting purely in the interests of the child, without the emotional input, without the link with the child, which we know the parents love the child more than anyone else. I think they have the best interest. But as we saw with the Charlie Gard case, perhaps don't always actually see the wood for the trees.
Yes, I do agree with Julie on this. I mean, I think the hardest thing is, to put yourself in that situation, you wish that there is something that can be done. And I can totally understand, you're a mum and this young baby, the mother only gave birth 7 months ago and she's carried this child. And with all the technology we have today, I can see how you'd be thinking there must be something you can do. And that's where I think, it's very rare that these cases come to the courts. And I think that's partly because the medical professionals with the families work very closely together to try and resolve these issues. And sometimes the parents even then can't make the decision.
I wanted to actually take you back to 2014. This case didn't come to the courts, but her parents were effectively made fugitives. We might show you some video now of Ashia King. This was a young chap with a brain tumour. I think we might see him at the Proton Centre in Prague. After a dispute with Southampton General Hospital, his parents effectively abducted the child. There was a manhunt. This child is now cured, and the doctors will have given their best endeavours. I don't question that for a second. They said he didn't have a hope. The little chap's alive. Julia, the doctors get it wrong.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why you get second opinions. But again, as with going back to the Charlie Card case, about which we know so much more, having gone to court, there were second opinions, there were third opinions, there were fourth opinions. The only opinion that differed was from a guy in America who'd never even seen the baby.
Yeah, but you see, I have to declare an interest here, because you might know this, but Caroline, you won't. I had a brother who was involved in a very serious road accident at the age of 17, and his parents, they told my parents, our parents, that he should be allowed to die, and my parents fought and fought, and they gave Simon every possible condition. He'll never get out of a wheelchair, he'll always be on crutches, and he went on to be a reporter at the Daily Mirror for 34 years. You've probably known. So I'm a bit on one side here. No, doctors do get it. I know with little Charlie they were right, but how do you ever wrestle with that, Caroline?
I don't think there's an easy answer to any of this. I mean, I think absolutely right for families. They are right to seek other opinions. You should never have to take at face value the first opinion you're given, especially in these situations, because you're going to fight for your child. But these are very difficult circumstances, and your family story, the family story you just told there about the parents who took their child overseas to seek treatment, these are important things to recognise that in this process there has to be an engagement here that isn't just about the first opinion.
Caroline, so let's just look at what the mum has said. This is a statement from Takesha Thomas. We believe that Isaiah deserves his chance to fight for his life. There is still more that can be done for him. We do not think it is in our son's best interest to stop the treatment which is keeping him alive. I should tell you the hospital's saying they're taking the best interests of the child and they've conferred with all the necessary specialists. Why not give the mum a chance, Julia?
Well, I mean, it sounds like they are, and it may be that a long drawn-out court case will end up giving that extra time. But again, is there not a very big difference between a physical disability and a brain disability? And this sounds like this young boy has had a severe lack of oxygen at birth and will never actually have any quality of life. I mean, look, I think this is a conversation that almost every family has to have at the beginning of life, the end of life, and we need to know where we would draw the line for ourselves and our family members.
And also, we probably have to give thanks that we wouldn't be a judge sitting on that case.
Absolutely.
Because Caroline and Julia, we wouldn't want that. Thank you very much to both of you. And that is it for tonight. Emma's back.